All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. And today is going to be a little ranty and a little heavier than normal because of
This
weekend
weekend,
shenanigans.
the weekend gave us a lot to talk about, apparently. And I don't know. I think I'm going to throw some stuff from left field out there because I like to look at things differently.
Uh-huh.
And everybody can get their fill of what the pundits are saying, whether you're blue side or red side or something in between. And sorry for the stuffy nose talk. It's a really weird day here. Like it's like almost like a haze over everything. So it's not cloudy, but it's almost like there's thin clouds blocking the sun. So it's kind of a weird feeling. It's like it's when it rains and it's still sunny. It kind of gives you that feeling. So whatever it is in the air is making my nose just like go crazy.
Yeah, we had a front blow through Texas, and
The
it's knocked
storm was
out the.
wicked last night. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't get any storm, unfortunately, so I still haven't had any rain in weeks here.
Well, we got
But
all the thunder and lightning and barely any rain. So it was windy, thunder, lightning, and usually there's a puddle in front of my house because just of the way the street is formed, and that had barely any water in it this morning. So obviously we didn't get much rain.
well, at least it knocked out the triple digits for a while, so
This is true. This is true.
make gardening marginally less awful.
Well, my okra is doing well, and it's blocking the sun from some of the other plants. So that's helping.
That's kind of how my setup is too, is I have certain things intended to shade other things. But when you get up to triple digits and you stay there for a while, the shade can only do so much.
True. Well, especially I don't know what it's like where you're at, but when the humidity is so high, there's no difference between the temperature in the shade and in the sun. So it kind of just negates that effect.
All right. Well, grumpy old man talking about the weather and gardening. That's really locked in the audience. So what's next?
What's next? Well, just in case we might have one or two new people, you had brought something up to me a long time ago, and I thought it was a great idea, and we never did it, was to kind of talk about some of our influences, because we're on here talking about stuff and some people listen to us, a couple people. Scott's out there. Hi, Scott. And we obviously not everything we say is an original thought, because there's only anytime you think of something you think is original, you're probably going to find it somewhere, because there's 7 point something billion people in the world. But I wanted to kind of go over, maybe talk about some of the people who influence our thoughts, whether maybe separate it, those that are still alive and doing things now, and maybe those that from history or the past. So you tell me which one you want to start with.
Well, let's start with current, of who we're reading, who we're listening to currently, and then we can work our way backwards. And this actually came about initially. The thought came to me when we were talking to Chuck, the affable gentleman, about Witcher, because I can say, or you can say, I like this or I don't like that particular piece of art, a show, a movie, a game. And it doesn't, unless you're really good at breaking things down technically, it doesn't mean that much if you don't know our tastes. So if I can tell you certain things I do like or don't like, then you go, okay, well, I know what this person's tastes are. So if they say, they thought The Witcher was okay, then that means more than if you have no idea what I like and don't like.
Well, maybe we start with fiction first, because obviously we've got a following on this channel for this dude right here. So it's so that's an obvious one, but I'll throw out my maybe less obvious one, H.P. Lovecraft. That guy was a genius when it comes to fictional writing. Hopefully it's fictional, because we're all dead. No, but he got swaths of people actually believing his stuff was nonfiction. And so my hat's off to that guy.
Well, he created it, he essentially created a genre. Now he wasn't the first to do this kind of pulp psychological horror. He had influences he drew on, like pretty much everyone does, but
But he put it together in a way that
mhm.
made it explode.
Yeah, in the same way that, you know, the fantasy of Tolkien wasn't entirely new, but he packaged it in a way that had not been done before, such that it created its own genre.
Yeah,
You
same
know,
with Jordan and name your favorite. Terry Brooks was good.
mhm.
Uh, Blanking anymore off the top of my head.
But if we're going to be talking philosophy as well, then for fiction, I will throw out there Robert Heinlein.
Okay, you're gonna have to introduce him to me because
Okay, well, his most famous or infamous, depending on who you're talking to, work is Starship Troopers.
oh okay.
Um,
Oh yeah.
and his books are not. I mean, he writes science fiction, but it's not like these giant Asimovian tomes, um, or the, you know, the kind of deep technical works of other writers. He's much more of a philosopher. In fact, in the book Starship Troopers, most of it is philosophical discussion and debate. There's actually not a lot of sci-fi action in there. And if you've ever watched the awful movie by that idiot German who needs to be banned from the country, um, it's absolutely nothing like the book. Sargon of Akkad, if you're familiar with his channel, he actually did a really good
Didn't he get banned for a
video.
while?
Yeah, he did, and then he made a second channel which got just as big. So he did a really good video a while back about is Starship Troopers fascist? Um, and he looked at the movie. He brought in the book, but it was mostly looking at the movie on its own terms. But anyway, that's how all of the stuff of Heinlein's that I've either read or know of is that the interesting science part of the sci-fi is the background for him to basically write a philosophical essay.
Then you can also include Douglas Adams. He had a lot of insights in his comedy point there.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at Heinlein. Actually, is in a lot of ways he's like a Douglas Adams, except he used, you know, kind of cutting philosophy rather than making you laugh to make his point.
Okay, so to nonfiction, I'm going to guess one from you.
Yeah.
I bet you if you had a top 5 influences, Thomas Sowell's going to be in there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's going to be one of your top 5. Where does he rank?
It's hard not to put him at number 1, because not only is he so insightful, and he has such a masterful way of, even though he is brilliant, he doesn't have to be translated like we sometimes have to do with the people we listen to or we reference. It's, you know, the last time we were talking about COVID, it was, okay, Sam, translate this into normal people talk, because we were talking some heavy duty witchcraft from, you know, Van and Bosch and Weinstein and Malone and these guys. Soul's never had that problem. He's never had to have someone translate him into something a lay person can understand. But he's also so freaking prolific. I counted up one time how many books he had published, and I don't remember what it was, but it's a ton.
Yeah, he's not in my top 5, but he's in my top 10. And you talked about the translation thing. I think that's where we come in too. And what we've been trying to do is, because it's something to coming from a humble background helps you with that, because you've kind of lived both lives. You know, the one thing the postmodernists don't get completely wrong is lived experience does help, because we came from a more humble background. But then I got into the scientific world and you got into the deep history world and all of that. You can still talk to your uncle or your aunt or your brother or sister or whatever, that you learned the language basically, and now you're just kind of translating the new language you learned. Like I learned technical writing in the scientific community. That's a language in and of itself. It's kind of hard to follow if you've never delved into it. And it's I think that's where Soul had an advantage there. And this might be a common thread with a lot of people we talk about is uh, they did start from somewhere where they still remember the language. And that I think that's why he was so prolific in explaining these complex situations with economics is just an amazingly complex thing that most people just don't get.
Yeah, that's a good point that I hadn't considered before, because another one who's, you know, an honorable mention would be Walter Williams, who's he's fun to listen to, the late great, because he's Dr. Soul is like a friendly uncle or grandfather explaining things to you. Walter Williams is a smart ass in the way that he approaches things, that he's going to be more sarcastic, he's going to be you know, a little more insulting, even a little more insult humor kind of bent to him. But he was also, you know, known through the mainstream like Soul, and they grew up in very similar situations, that they had very similar, you know, life stories where they grew up in real poverty, in, you know, the literal ghetto. Soul grew up in Harlem in the 40s and 50s, and Walter Williams grew up in the ghettos of Philadelphia, you know, around the same time period. So it makes sense that they would both be able to kind of cross over out of academia to talk to, you know, non-professors and non-PhD candidates, and have it make sense when they both came from such similar humble beginnings.
All right, so I guess one. You try to guess one of my top five.
Well, I know you've read him and you've referenced him a lot, and I'm gonna guess that Dawkins is in your top five.
He's honorable mention, but no,
Okay.
no. If he had done more in the last 20 years, he probably would be there, because Selfish Gene is like the basis. He would be like right there at the bubble of 5 and 6. But no, just listening to him talk more recently, he's still good, but I wouldn't put him top 5 thinkers of this era. Now, piggybacking on him, though, I would say Robert Sapolsky is, because his understanding of the human brain, and then making that, like we talked about with Soul there, accessible to people. Because if you listen to his speeches, even if you watch his Stanford biology classes, it's like every man can understand this. That's one of the reasons I love it so much. Now, Behave got a little dense reading through it, but Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers is, I mean, anybody could read that book and get some sort of understanding of how the brain works under these situations. And then his 15-minute, I saw a thread on Twitter once where it was, name the most influential YouTube video or whatever that's 20 minutes or less. In 15 minutes, he explains how the human brain reacts in a split-second decision, going all through the moment to moment, the genetic, the history and everything in 15 minutes. And you're like, wow, that was completely understandable. So I put him probably, I know it's hard to place them in the top 5, because it's like my debate on, is LeBron better than Michael, because they're different. They're different positions. They're different. We have to say, who's the best shooting guard? Who's the best point guard? And so my top 5 is kind of like, who's the best philosopher? Who's the best neuroscientist?
Yeah.
Who's the best?
Yeah. And then you also have to look at the sports analogy is a good one of because you have to parse the era that they played in. So like the Bird Johnson debate is such a good one because they played in the same era and played against each other in
And the
multiple
same position
finals.
and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you look at
And the great
uh,
thing about those two is they both say the other guy was the greatest,
mm,
which is very humble and respectful.
and so going back a little bit in philosophy, look at William F. Buckley Jr. and Noam Chomsky. They were contemporaries. They were far apart politically, ideologically, and they actually, debated against each other. And so that
Chomsky did not age well with the COVID thing. He
no,
said some stuff that was
yeah, I'd heard he had, but I hadn't
basically
heard what.
people, yeah, basically he made statements to the extent of people who are hesitant about certain things should just die.
Well, I got an interesting video for that if I feel like digging it up later. But um, the point was iron sharpens iron,
Mhm.
and so it's not an accident that both of those men went on, then in the 60s and 70s, to become very prolific and leaders of their respective ideological camps. But then you get into a place where if you don't have that uh, if you don't have that antagonism, you become stagnant, which explains a lot of Chomsky's later pronouncements in later life, and even William Buckley, the organization he created, National Review, has become quite stagnant and is no longer a leader amongst conservative leaning pundits and commentators. It's not referenced and held in the regard that it was even 10 years ago.
I'd say in your top five is probably Jordan Peterson.
Of modern thinkers, he has to be up there because there was stirrings of it, but I really feel like he created the apolitical movement that a lot of people, what has led you here to, making me do this stupid podcast, it was apolitical. It was a philosophical movement that kind of in the Venn diagram, it crossed over into the politics, but mostly it was a, hey, wait a minute, why is this a political issue in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know,
Why is a disease a political issue? Why are race relations something that seem to go across party lines? Things like that.
So, and he created he helped create kind of the new right in the same way that Trump did, from Jordan from the
We'll get to
philosophical
Trump because I do
side,
have some thoughts on him too.
Trump on the political side, Jordan on the philosophical side of because he was apolitical and he kind of pulled people out of those ruts that they were in when they argued and debated and thought about politics and political philosophy. And Jordan kind of pulled people out of those ruts because he doesn't accept your premise, and he's very good with the Socratic method of finding the right questions to kind of burst bubbles, and then you have to sit back and you have to go, okay, well, let me think about that for a second. Now, to his detriment, as you've talked about, is sometimes he goes way overboard in that.
Mhm.
With you referenced his podcast with Dawkins, where he's trying to be so
He
precise with the language that he won't shut
talks
up.
80 to 85% of the time. It was somewhere around there. And Dawkins was very polite. He kept saying, and you could hear that behind it was, can I speak now? Let's see.
I'm guessing he's on your list as well.
Top 10. Okay. Again, he's kind of that bubble area where there's another philosophical psychologist that I put a bit above him, and I bet you might be able to guess this one. Currently alive, currently active, currently doing a lot.
I'm drawing a blank. I'm trying to think of who you listen to that's a psychologist. I got nothing.
Heterodox Academy.
I blame the Benadryl.
Jonathan Haidt.
Oh, duh. Yeah.
Everything I've read of his and listened to, I mean, he's got some things obviously politically that, but he tries not to tread on that. He'll
Mhm.
mention it if he's asked, but when it comes to just breaking down why people think the way they do and
Yeah.
articulating it in a way that's understandable, I mean, I think every teacher in this country needs to read his works.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's he stays away from the political unless asked directly because that's not what's important to him. It's much like how I kind of came to the point where I'm at, where I got so frustrated arguing and debating with people on Facebook because there was no argument or debate. It was, all right, look, I don't even want to argue the point, but can you at least acknowledge there is a point? And this was one of William F. Buckley's snarky comments on liberals back in the day. Was it, I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the exact quote. Is liberals often claim to be open-minded and tolerant of other views, but then seem genuinely shocked to discover there are other views. And that sentiment is no longer just a function of the left. I would contend it's worse on the left, but that's not really the point. And Haidt's point is both sides are becoming so entrenched and putting such big blinders on that, forget who's right or wrong in the debate. We can't have a debate the way because we have been conditioned to not think, to simply accept information and do. And for someone like Haidt, that's a big effing deal. He wants people who are able to think. He wants people who are free thinkers. Because he recognizes this has often been attributed to Voltaire, and I'm not entirely sure if he actually said this or not, but people who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities.
Yeah. Well, and he also is a very big advocate of John Stuart Mill, who I would put on my list of greatest historical people, influential thinkers, and probably because my historical ones are probably going to run in line with my current ones in thinking philosophy. But the best, he summarizes it in the best cure for your own cognitive dissonance is somebody else's cognitive dissonance. And you have to have those discussions where you both have this different view of it. And that's the best cure for your own blind spots is discussing things with somebody else who has the opposite blind spots. Give me one that's going to surprise me in your top 5.
Of current?
Current.
That is a good question.
Well, I'll let you think about this because one of the reasons I wanted to have this was actually somebody I was listening to. And it made me think of this discussion because the more I listen to this man, the more impressed I become. And I just, every time I see his name on anything, I click on it now. Douglas Murray. He is probably one of the greatest thinkers of this generation. And I figured that one would surprise you because he's quite conservative, which is kind of counter to a lot of the things that I do and I believe in. But he just keeps impressing me. His conversation with Lex Friedman was, I mean, if anybody has 2 hours to give, that's a good 2 hours to spend. But yeah, the more I listen to him and read him, the better he gets.
I don't know if I can think of, because to me, at the point I'm at right now, most of the people I listen to are kind of on a level with each other. And really mostly what I'm looking for now is information. It's one of the reasons that, and something the left never figured out about Rush Limbaugh, is because when he first went national, you know, there was no Drudge Report, there was no Yahoo News, there was no Fox News on cable. And he wasn't just a source of entertainment. He wasn't just a source of political affirmation. He was a source of information that he would dig through the wires, in the old days of various, newspaper and magazine reporting, and he would pull out important and interesting stories that you weren't going to see on the nightly news or you weren't going to see on CNN. And so I've gravitated more towards people like Steve Deace and Daniel Horowitz because they focus on things that you're not going to hear on the other right-leaning podcasts. And so I got tired of the ones I was listening to that were kind of a big circle jerk. It's like, okay, so I used to listen to Beck and Shapiro, and I can't even remember who are the other ones I used to listen to.
Probably the guy who does the Prove Me Wrong, or
Crowder.
Crowder, yeah.
Yeah, I mostly watch his show now for laughs.
Or Change My Mind, I think is what it is, right?
Yeah.
Change My Mind.
So I mostly watch his show for laughs, and I actually don't like his unscripted stuff as much because he gets on my nerves. So when he does kind of Man on the Street or Change My Mind stuff, I find him grating. So I watch his show more often because I find his scripted content funny. It fits my sense of humor.
Yeah.
But
Beck I can tolerate in portions.
Yeah,
depending on who he's talking to.
I like that. I don't remember when he started doing this, but when he posts his radio show in podcast format, he also posts a truncated version of best of that show. And so instead of the 2.5 hours, it's like 45 minutes. And so I'll sometimes listen to that, but I eventually got annoyed with a lot of the National Review commentators were ones that I would listen to as well, and they all just became a circle jerk. Like, you're all talking about the same damn thing, and it's bad enough that you're all talking about the same thing. You're also saying the same thing about the same thing, right? So I gravitated more towards people who, and really the election and COVID were kind of watershed moments, because you would think that the right would be all over that, but most of them were afraid to talk about those two issues in any way that was even remotely contrary. And when I found people who were not only offering contrary opinions, but then were backing it up with a good deal of facts and evidence, that was interesting to me.
Yeah, I think when I was thinking of my list, to kind of put in something you said, but a little bit differently, is I was looking for people that you can tell deep down inside that they were original thoughts. Even if they did repeat something that somebody else said in opinion wise, it was still, you could tell it came from actually diving into what the subject was, versus, oh, I heard this and I'm going to repeat it on this channel just to get my viewership up or whatever. And so I think that was one of the things that one of my criteria was, because you could tell some people that just, well, I don't know a whole lot about this, so I'm gonna just repeat what this other person said. And this is I think where Jordan slid for me, because if you listen to his interviews of people and then you listen to him being interviewed, you can actually put some of the answers based on the last person he listened to, which some people would say is great because he's adapting, but it's almost like he just takes that person's word for it after he interviews them. Maybe right, maybe wrong, but at the same time, I can't imagine he'd have the time to dive into some of these subjects the way he answers confidently later. So that kind of slid him down for me, listening to him being interviewed as well as him interviewing. But I think to cap out my list, I think Steven Pinker would have to be on there. Which, if anybody wants a refreshing philosophical view of humanity now, that's a little bit better, because he likes to focus on the positive things of humanity. And I don't know who else. I don't know who else I'd put on that list. Honorable mention, but she just doesn't have the body of work, is Annie Duke. She's got amazing insight on the way we make decisions, but at the same time, there's just not a big body of work to go with it, so it's hard to put her on that list. Anybody else I might be missing?
I don't know. Okay, well, something just jumped into my head of, okay, here's one that might surprise you. Dennis Prager for his theology.
See, that surprises me, not because I know you like him, but because I wouldn't have figured you'd put him so high on the list.
Well, yeah, eventually we're gonna have some Sunday school class, and it's going to be heavily influenced. Not necessarily in that, like, I'm going to be quoting from Prager a lot, but we're going to start with the Old Testament because of Prager. That's where my thinking and study has been for the last several years. Has been, I'm ready to take my hard copies of Bibles and tear out the stupid little page that says Old Testament, New Testament, because I find the separation heretical, and that all stems from Prager.
Okay, that makes me want to have that discussion even more, even though we've teased it, but we've never done it. I guess I need to reread Berinsky. I don't want to, but well, I think he I don't know. He takes the metaphysical, and at the end of the day, you can sum up the book by saying it's everything we can't explain means there's evidence of God. And you could just say that one statement, and that's the entire book. And then he basically just trashes on everybody that disagrees with that. The four horsemen of the atheist movement and stuff. And it's like that's ad hominem arguments. There's no, you can't prove something you can't disprove something you can't prove, and you can't prove something you can't disprove. And so that's the where everybody's butting heads, and so it's 300 pages of that.
Yeah, but his snark is funny and makes me laugh.
I mean, he's witty. There is that.
Yeah. All right. Well, do you have more thoughts on this? Keep going down this rabbit hole, or?
No, we can run. I was going to bring up Bruce Lee as a historical one, but then I was recently rereading Sun Tzu, and Bruce Lee is just repeating Sun Tzu. So he made it.
Show.
Yeah, he made it understandable. But everybody's heard the "Be water, my friend" from Bruce Lee. But if you go to Sun Tzu, military formation is like water. The form of water is to avoid the high and go low. The form of military force is to avoid the full attack and the empty. The flow of water is determined by the earth. The victory of a military force is determined by the opponent. And it's almost re-quoting it for just your physical self. And so Sun Tzu's definitely got to go there in the top. I got Thomas Aquinas up here. He's a good thought. Lucretius, one of my favorite Greeks. One, you mentioned something that made me think of him. I think the most underappreciated Greek philosopher is Heraclitus, because he basically summed up organic chemistry in a day and age when they had no idea what a carbon was. His flux and flow of the earth and everything was correct, just for the wrong reasons, because he didn't have a microscope and he couldn't break down all these these chemicals on their own. So I think he's very underappreciated because he had it right without any tools necessary.
Uh, I've mentioned before, so I'll just briefly re-mention for, older philosophers, John Locke and Frederick Bastiat, because they're talking, their kind of realm is political philosophy and, political structures, but they come at it with, first we have to understand human nature.
Mhm.
We have to we have to have a deep think and discussion about human nature, or whatever structure we come up with will be flawed at best, or negative at worst.
Which is one of the things that got this cast going, because I, when I tried to make sense of all the crap that was going on, it was like, this makes sense psychologically, neurologically, and a society is nothing more than an extension of the people's psychology within it. And what are the averages? What is the average reaction to this? What is going to happen? And I was like, oh, well, that makes sense now. And I wanted to try to project that out. And I think that's what you're describing with Locke. And who was the other one?
Bastiat. Both of whom you can, find as free ebooks on your phone. So if you want to read, go to whatever your book application is and look for those two. There's a lot of good old stuff out there that that different nonprofits will put up in ebook format. Bastiat is French, and I can't remember the organization that did the translation and then posted it. And then you can find the Greek philosophers you've mentioned.
Mhm.
There are people who have done those translations. Aquinas, people have done those translations and posted them as ebooks for free download. So if you want an education in the classics, then go read the classics.
Well, and even I mean, you're obviously on YouTube if you're listening to this, unless you're one of our few people that listen on Rumble. But just search for something you want to learn about. Go to Stanford's YouTube page. They have like 100 and something classes. You can watch the whole semester of lectures for free. You can, whatever subject you want, learn something new for free from Stanford. You just don't get the piece of paper at the end. That's the only difference. They even tell you what books they're going by in this, and it's pretty impressive that you can just basically educate yourself for free like this. Now, again, you don't get the piece of paper, so nobody takes you seriously if you start talking about it, but it's there.
Well, that's a really long prologue. So let's pause for a second so I can refill my coffee, and then we'll get into why we started rambling and ranting about that to begin with.
All right, we got our drinks refilled, and we're going to get on to the heavy stuff. Though I did want to put in an honorable mention. We talked about the greatest thinkers of this day and age. This might ruffle some feathers, but I would have to say the most influential person of our lifetime has to be Donald J. Trump. And I can justify that thought. About 35% of this country can't think straight because they love him so much. About 35% of this country can't think straight because they hate him so much. And the other 30% in the middle still have a rent-free space in their head because of all the crap that's going on. And which we'll get into some of that just now. But if you want to talk about the most influential person of our lifetime, that's the definition of influential. Love him or hate him, he's influencing your thought.
Yeah. I would hope those numbers would be lower, but I think you're right. It probably is closer to 35%.
Yeah. No, he's not. He's definitely slid some, because it was higher than 35% that loved him. But,
yeah, that's true. I
think the latest numbers out of New Hampshire. Yeah, New Hampshire is where the primaries start, right? The latest numbers out of there is DeSantis would beat Trump in a primary there.
Yeah, so which is a pretty Big deal.
That's
That's
good news. I mean, you might not love DeSantis, but he's not Donald J. Trump. So
Mhm.
so at least his influence is waning. But love him or hate him, he's influencing our lives. I've some of the great thinkers that we talked about can't think straight because of that man.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, you've brought up a few of them before of every time they veer even close to Trump, the derangement comes out and then they start saying stupid things that are kind of contradictory to the things they were just saying before.
exactly.
That's really frustrating.
Yeah. Pinker's an example. I brought him up. Jonathan Haidt's another example. He just when it gets onto the politics of it, which is where he loses his genius, he can't get the TDR out of his head. Sam Harris is another great example. He babbles like a child.
I think he's probably the worst. I think he's probably the worst because he is such a deep thinker normally, and he is,
He
so good at
literally
expressing those
wrote the
thoughts.
book on using rationality to create
Uh-huh.
morality.
Mm-hmm.
And he loses all
Literal.
rationality.
And he becomes, I mean, he really becomes a low IQ MSNBC commentator when he starts talking about Trump. It's sad.
Which don't take these last couple of years of his behavior to as a testament to that is one of the best books I've ever written. The more read. I didn't write it. I didn't write the book. One of the best books I've ever read. I was mixed up two sentences. One of the best books ever written is The Moral Landscape, because the best 8 hours, some of the best 8 hours you can see on YouTube is his debates with Peterson. And the answer is yes, but it depends on who you're talking to. Some people need it the way Peterson presents it, and some people need it the way Harris presents it. Some people need archetypes. Some people need to go from the bottom up. And as I'm listening to it, I'm like, you're both right. Just depends on who you're talking to. Yeah. What's their personality type? How do they learn things? I learn things better your way, Harris. But I can we got two people right here that you learn things better Peterson's way. And so the answer is yes.
Yeah. Well, let's explain how this applies to Roe v. Wade and the nonsense that we're headed towards, because I'm sure it's only going to get worse.
Okay. Well, part of it is we do need a moment of that rationality, because you can go back to our debates on abortion for our views on what should be the case on it's a modern problem is the thing. Here's my take on it. It's a modern problem, and it's a testament that we can get so pissed off over this of how good we actually have it, because we talked about the neurobiology extending to the psychology, extending to the sociology. The fact that we can argue over whether or not we want to have a baby is actually quite luxurious. There are places in this world, and there were times even in the best places, you were worried about being able to have children and them survive. And that should be that's we're hardwired to worry about that. That's why we can't not have sex, even though we don't want to have a baby, because we're hardwired to do it, to procreate. That's a modern problem. It's just like our modern diets. We can't help but eat an Oreo because we're hardwired to crave sugar, fat, and salt. Because in a day and age where we didn't get to eat every day, that was a good thing. That was a survival skill. So we're hardwired to have sex. It's just it's readily available to us all. The problem isn't sex; it's the fact that it's readily available. So it's a luxurious problem to have, that we can be arguing over this in the first place. That's where I want to start with that.
Well, that's an interesting point, and I hadn't quite wasn't sure that's where you were going.
I told you I was going to throw one out.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the main point of that is people still argue, and again, go check out our other ones and you'll know my stance on this. I am actually pro abortion. I'm not going to call it pro choice, because let's use the right words, because we have to clear up the argument, because to say someone's pro-life and to say someone's pro-choice, that actually muddies the water a little bit.
Yeah, here, enable sharing so I can
Oh,
post
sorry.
this visual aid.
All right, you should be able to do it now.
We are hardwired for food and sex, and I know which one us males would choose first. I love this meme. We have used the male lion as an analogy for male behavior quite often, and there's a reason.
But that's actually why I'm pro abortion right, because we have this hardwired, we have to adjust for modern times. We have this hardwired part of ourselves that it's one of the most powerful forces we have psychologically. We, again, eat, drink water, and procreate are the main drivers. Find shelter, if you want to add a fourth, are the main drivers of human existence. Realistically, they will overpower anything else.
Physical protection and sustenance and procreation. So survive, spread your genes.
There's a reason.
It's very basic.
There's a reason you lose all cognitive ability when you hit that honeymoon love, that erotic love, because that's what drives you to challenge the alpha male. If you're in the wild, you may be smaller, you may be whatever compared to the person that would normally procreate with this person. So you need something that makes you irrational to make that move. And that didn't go away now that we have cities and buildings and Hinge, right? So it, or even Bumble, where they approach you as a guy. So that didn't go away. And because there is, even with contraceptive, a possible after result of that, we need some sort of mechanism to actually keep that under control, or else we're just going to go crazy. The whole, you can just be abstinent. Well, you get in that situation enough times with the right people, and I think you'll be talking out one side and acting out the other. So that's why I'm pro that. Now, the fact that we have that, I think, is the sobering thought that we can even have this discussion, is that we're so far removed from the negative side of nature that if you can be happy about that for a second, maybe you'll be less mad about things going on, and we can take a sober look at this. Maybe it's not the end of the world at this point. And then we can go into where did you think I was going with this? So maybe I can tie them together.
I thought we were going to talk about the unhinged reaction, which is, I guess, basically what you were
which is what I said about. Yeah. If you realize how good we
yeah.
have it, and how the fact that you can even protest this from a natural standpoint, not from a legal standpoint, from a natural standpoint, kind of gives you that feeling of like, wow, okay, maybe life is good. Maybe I can take my time about figuring out how the best way to do this.
I mean, the absolute
I don't need to burn a car.
lunacy of some of these protesters. If you go out and you find some montages of, the pro-abortion ones, the absolute lunacy, and I use that term very specifically because the statements they are making are just absurd on their face. You're walking outside and saying, the sky is purple and the sun is green. It is that literally unhinged. When you start, women are literally going to die in the streets. Women are literally going to bleed out. How? Why? No, just two very simple questions. You have just made a very inflammatory statement. Before you made that statement, were there any synapses in your brain firing to ask a couple of very basic questions?
Mm-hmm. Well, the after effect too of that is, the more extreme you are in that reaction, the more likely the end result is going to be the opposite of what you want. So yeah, it put it back on states. And guess what? That actually gave you more power
Yeah,
because now your vote matters more. When it
can't
was
remember.
a judicial decision, your vote didn't matter one lick.
Yeah, so a good example is I was looking at a bunch of Twitter responses, stupidity to this, and I believe he was a Columbia law professor, had this idiotic tweet about how this is how democracy dies. Hold on a second.
It's the opposite of it. It's
Either you're a liar or you're functionally retarded and should not be holding the job you hold. The issue of
talked about the not
abortion.
big thinkers repeating things though. That's
Yes.
one of those terms. Democracy
Yes. Yeah.
dies is one of the new trendy terms.
Yeah. And so it is death to democracy when you take this issue, forget the issue. You have just taken an issue away from unelected, pretty much unaccountable judges and put it back, not just in the hands of elected representatives, but state elected representatives, which are far more accountable and influenceable by the voter than a federal representative.
Yeah.
So
I would still like to see it go to an amendment process. It may not even get anywhere because of the amount of cooperation you would need to get, but that the amendment process blends the Fed and the state because you need the 2/3 vote in Congress and the Senate, and you need a certain number of states to ratify
3/4 state
legislatures. So I think I personally think if we're going to put this to rest, it needs to go in that. But I don't think it's anybody's interest to put it to rest. I think they want it to be a fight.
Yeah.
In fact, if we were to have another leak, I bet you the 3 dissenting opinions pushed the vote because it helps their side in this election cycle.
Well, speaking of, I'd said I went on the record that I thought the opinion was going to get changed before it was issued, and I feel icky saying this, but to John Roberts' credit, he actually went in the other direction. That it was a 5-4 split. It became a 6-3 split because of the leak. Roberts actually joined with the majority. Now, he only gets a smidge of credit because he wrote his own opinion where he tried to thread the needle and say that I haven't read the whole thing, but from the bits I've seen, it was utterly nonsensical. He was somehow trying to say
he was trying to double talk.
Yeah, he was trying to double talk and say that this decision both upheld and repealed Roe. Like, what the hell, man? You're such a weasel. Anyway, but
again, I would like to see the leaders that we count on actually educate the public instead of just throw out rhetoric and try to at least discuss this thing in the proper way, which again, the difference between the 2 big decisions this weekend were the gun control ruling and the Roe v. Wade ruling, and they seem to contradict each other, but they don't because the Second Amendment exists.
Yeah.
And if we had a talk of an amendment, then you can say it's a constitutional right within certain parameters.
Gun regulations are a federal issue, even if it's a state law, because it is a specifically protected right in the Constitution. The entire point, and I haven't read the whole decision yet, but from the bits I've heard of people quoting it, it doesn't seem like it changed much from when we went through it, the leaked decision. And the entire point of that decision was this isn't a federal issue. The deciders in Roe and then again in Casey just invented this idea that abortion is not specifically protected by the Constitution. Therefore, this is not our issue. This is a state issue. And the unhinged response and the fact that I don't see anybody, to your point about people not wanting this issue to go away, if you actually cared about the issue itself, then all of these people who are going nuts would be going nuts to focus attention on state legislatures now, because that's where the ball is. The ball is in that court.
Which
I
I mean,
don't, I haven't seen
it's
that.
it's blowing me away because it's like shooting themselves in the foot. You, this is obviously an issue that is important to some people. Again, I think it's a first world problem, but I also understand why it's a big issue for people. And this should be the yes, this happened, come vote 2022. You know, that I don't get why that's not the message.
And
And
more
the more and
specifically,
also the more you riot, the more people are going to vote against you.
yes, and more specifically, not just that, you know, this is why we need to. Every person I have seen reference the midterm has been talking about the federal electors, the federal positions of this is why we need to make sure that we, you know, the Democrats keep the House and the Senate. All right, well, except again, it's not a federal issue anymore.
It's a state issue.
It's a state issue. So you should be, and this is why those down ballot positions matter too. And I haven't seen that because to your point, the agitation and more tangibly, the fundraising off of that agitation is what matters. The issue doesn't matter.
Now, what I'm confused on, and maybe you'll know the answer to this, the trigger laws, the ones that the states automatically reverted to banning abortion if Roe v. Wade was thrown down. Texas apparently had the trigger law, but it also constitutionally passed the heartbeat bill. Which one supersedes which? Because one was constitutionally done. You would think it would be the heartbeat bill.
It would. Well, since the heartbeat bill is a civil thing, it's a civil action. They might both be in effect. So it would.
But you can't ban it and then have it legal up to a certain point.
I don't know. It would depend on the wording of the statute of the trigger bill, or so as I understand it, some state legislatures had actually passed legislation since Roe and Casey with specific wording of if this was ever revoked, this is what would happen. But as I understand it, there are other states that simply left their laws on the books. So with Roe and Casey gone, it's just going to revert to whatever that law was.
Well, and that's what theoretically Texas was, but then they had already passed a new one. So I didn't know which one superseded which, the one done later, or
I have to think that
unless there was wording that says this supersedes any future legislation.
Oh, you know what? Now that, because we talked about it and we went through, I think there's wording in that heartbeat bill that says that if Roe is repealed, then I'm pretty sure there's wording in there, something to the effect of this does not contradict or override this other law. Again, because that heartbeat bill was a civil law. It's there are no criminal, it very specifically says there are no criminal penalties, and state actors, attorneys general and district attorneys can't participate in this. This is for civil action.
I'm going to be intellectually consistent here. For part of my reasoning behind supporting the ability to terminate things, at least within a certain time frame, is consistent with my vaccine mandate position. Because one of my reasons for opposing mandates is it's not a risk-free procedure, even though it might be rare. Well, even with the new numbers, it's still relatively rare. Neither is carrying a child. It is not risk-free for the mother, even in normal situations. And so I think that's another thing we have to consider with that, because a lot of the dissenting opinions from conservatives nowadays is there are still clauses for medical issues and things like that. But you don't have to accept the risk of those medical issues until it's time. You should have a point in time where you could say, I am not going to take this risk at this point in my life. So I think in that I'm being a little bit more consistent, but you may beg to differ because the procedure to end it is not risk free either. So that's part of
Certainly
the
not to the
debate.
child.
Yeah, well, definitely not to the child, obviously, but I don't know. I
Well,
guess the main thing was to in order to take a sober look at this, sometimes appreciating the good in our life is the way to go. And the fact that we can even have this debate without with very little talk about, well, if I get pregnant, will the baby survive? On the other end of that is we got it good. We really got it good.
yeah. Yeah, I think I referenced this before, but I'm just brain farted on her name. King Edward the First of England, his wife had a child about every other year they were married. I think like she was pregnant a total of like 16 times. And if I remember the number correctly, only 4 children made it to adulthood.
Yeah, before modernity, people poop on the
And
West.
this is
Before
a frick,
modernity, 50% was great.
and this is the freaking queen,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Best medical
And
care in the country, right?
you know, best medical care, best nutrition. She didn't have to worry about food like most of the population did.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big effing deal. Um, anyway,
There's
one
a
more.
reason. There's a reason why females are so selective about sexual partners, and it has so much to do with resources versus just good looks and things like that.
Mhm.
Is because the investment involved physically is huge, and the survival rate of that child, even all the way through term in nature, is very low. So you're investing a great part of your life, a lot of your internal resources for something that's not guaranteed, where a guy just gives up a couple sperm.
Um, so before we get too far off on a tangent, there was a big point I was headed towards with the asinine Columbia law professor, which is if you actually engage in some with these people who think this is the worst thing ever enough, eventually you get to a point, uh you know, if you press them on the state issue where they basically say, well, not everyone's going to make the right choice, and by right they mean what they think should be done, that the states can't be trusted to deal with this. Okay, well, a state is not a sentient being. You're talking about the citizens of those states. So what you're saying is you don't like and don't trust the various people who live in those states to do what you want them to do. I was just in Oklahoma and there are dispensaries freaking everywhere. Okay. So because Texas doesn't think marijuana should be legal, we have the right to force Oklahoma to do it the way we want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And in Oklahoma, it's just medicinal. So they have a right to force Colorado to stop letting it be recreational because that's wrong. It's none of your damn business. Now, I think what is a human life and when does it begin is a much bigger issue than can I toke up. But the principle, the structural political principle is the same of we are autonomous beings endowed by nature and nature's God with inalienable rights. And it's our freaking business to decide how we want to govern ourselves within certain parameters. And this is one of those parameters, as the court has pointed out, as you have pointed out. This is not in the Constitution. It's not our business. If you want it to be our business, then go through the amendment process.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just think it's the best way because there's very little complaints after going through that process because there has to be so much cooperation. The complaints happen when it's that 50-50 vote, when 51 can say this and 49 have to adhere to
I've
it.
ranted about this a little bit before, but it is one of the great dangers of how we have been governing ourselves for well over a decade. This started in the Obama administration, and Trump didn't make it any better, which is, I think the Trump budget was the first actual budget that had been passed since like 2006. So you got to blame Bush a little bit for this too. But a lot of people don't realize that when the federal government keeps passing its budgets, it's not passing a budget. It's passing a continuing resolution to just say, yeah, we'll just keep doing what we've been doing. No,
Mhm.
no, you sit down, you debate, you argue, you crunch the numbers, and you pass an actual effing bill. And that's most of what the federal legislature and executive have been doing. We have been ruled by continuing resolutions, by executive orders, and by bureaucratic regulations. The
Which is actually
bureaucracy itself
is
passing laws,
it's
basically.
something we could have self-corrected during COVID, because this is where the courts do come in. They should have taken all of those executive orders and said, no, it's not an emergency anymore.
Mhm.
This is not the first few days of this. You could have gotten
Yeah.
together as a legislature after this point in time and done this the
Well,
right way.
Forget, let's just pretend there's no mechanism for calling an emergency session, which there absolutely is. You have had regular business sessions since then,
Mhm.
multiple regular business sessions since then, and we are still acting under these emergency orders. We are not governed by the normal rules of elected representation anymore, and we have not been for quite some time. And this particular issue should be a turning point where we can say, okay, we need to get back to governing ourselves as we were meant to be governed. And, to our point earlier, but to too many people, that is counterproductive because it harms their power and their position. They want the agitation, they want the issue, and they want the fundraising.
Let's talk about stress for a second. How stressful is it when it's a 50-50 situation and you're afraid of what the other side wants? Right? So this is, you don't like Donald J. Trump. This is what gets you Donald J. Trump.
Mhm.
You don't like Joseph F, whatever his middle name is, Biden. F is right.
Robinette.
Oh, Joseph R. Biden, right? You don't like him. This is how you get Joseph Biden, because there was a situation where there's these two huge sides, and whoever crosses that 51% gets their way. Why are we not doing this in a way where there has to be cooperation across the board? Because then as a voter, I'm a lot less stressed over who wins this local election, because, well, you know what? That's one more, but we still need 2/3 for this crazy thing to happen. So we don't have to worry about the crazies. People are talking about the extremes ruling both sides. We don't have to worry about the extremes if we make this a process where we need more than just one extra vote on one side or the other. You don't even have to worry about that anymore, because it's not going to exist. Those extremes, we just look at them and laugh and say, you're an idiot. And so why did we drift away from that, other than the power that these people that can be that one vote get? It just, there's no other.
Because we wanted to pass the buck, and we didn't want to have to your point, first world problems. We didn't even want the little bit of stress that would have gone along with that. I refer back to, I've mentioned this before, of Robert Jordan at a thing in Australia, and this young woman got up and was asking a question about the government, and he said, no, stop. You did. All of you, me, we did. So don't just put this on the government, they are elected representatives, which means you did, which means we all of us who live in, representative democracies have a portion of blame here, because it's our job to hold them accountable. And we haven't been, because we didn't want to deal with it. We didn't want the stress. We didn't want to pay attention. We didn't want the discomfort that would go along with it.
Well, and that's where in modern day and age, it almost gives you that helpless feeling, because we're talking about what would be the better situation, but what politician can I vote for that agrees with that? And so at some point, we keep saying we pass the buck, but I mean, other than going into politics ourselves, there's really not much choice. I mean, I don't know anybody who's speaking this way that is actually in power. Definitely not any president, because any president just wants to have that one vote to be
Yeah.
able to get their way.
Yeah.
Bringing up a source for me.
I said something that I had been thinking about for a while. And now I can't find it. So we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I've referenced this before of dang it, I can't find I was looking for a highlight reel. The only thing I made my son do was wrestling. Because you are going to be uncomfortable if you are grappling.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. We've referenced this talking about fitness, about lifting, that you need to stress your muscles and make them uncomfortable. Pain is bad. No pain, no gain is stupid, but I want you to be in discomfort. And so since I was in a hotel, I had a TV and I watched it, and it made me mad a lot, but I'll talk about that later. And so I watched the UFC for the first time in forever. UFC fight night, Friday or Saturday night, whenever it was. There was a great lightweight bout between two people whose names I can't can't pronounce, because one of them is from Georgia and one of them is from Poland. So, did you watch it?
No, I did not get to watch this one.
Okay. I was trying to find like an official page, because the first couple of videos I found had already been taken down, but I was trying to see if they had an actual YouTube channel for ESPN or UFC where they put up a highlight reel, and I couldn't. But if you can find Saryukin and Gamrot, whatever, something like that. And the first couple of rounds,
they put a lot up for free on their Facebook page, so you might subscribe there.
There was some incredible scrambles, because both of these guys are apparently good wrestlers. So there was some absolute incredible scrambling, and that is a great illustration of what I mean by being comfortable being uncomfortable, because there were some really awkward positions both of those guys were in throughout the fight. And if you coach youth, you'll see kids that are not comfortable being uncomfortable, that are not used to being in any kind of discomfort. You can tell, because either they flail around and freak out and spaz out, or they just try and turtle and give up.
Well, and it's not just a personality trait, because one of my jobs at the gym I trained at was because grappling was my forte, and submissions, especially from awkward situations, because I wasn't as athletic back then. This athleticism, if I had that back then, my record probably would have been a lot better. But I was just coming into athleticism at that point. But my job was to be the guy that didn't look like much, that was the first one to roll with anybody that came in like, oh, I've had 500 street fights, or I've never lost a fight, or blah, 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 blah. So it was my job to be the pathetic looking guy that humbled these guys. And you get that, what you're talking about, the first time an arm closes around their neck. As soon as that feeling happens, when you're getting a little bit of that, you can feel the panic come out of them. And the ones that show up again are the ones you can coach. The ones that never show up again were the ones that you never were going to make anything special to begin with. And but I want to add a dimension to that with wrestling, jujitsu, and all the things we're talking about. you learn to master your body, because if you don't master your own body, someone else is going to take it over for you. So that's a certain type of mindset. It's kind of the basis of what we're talking about, why I have a libertarian bend, because no one's going to be my master. I am nobody's slave. And with a lot of the things that go on in very subtle ways, in a lot of ways, and in very obvious ways in others, we're kind of somebody else's slave. And in wrestling and jujitsu and any grappling sport, any combat sport, realistically, if you're not a master of your own body, you will never not be taken over by somebody else. They will school you, and they will make you feel helpless, and that's a horrible feeling. And I think they're very synonymous to the things we talk about. So.
There were a couple of, I was looking for still images at least. I couldn't find any either, because there were 2 points in particular I wanted to bring out about this fight. There were such great illustrations. This is in either the first or second round. The guy who ended up winning was in a very bad position. For anyone who doesn't know what a double leg is, it is what it sounds like. So a takedown where the guy who's doing the taking down gets hold of both of your legs. Well,
and when you lose the ground, you lose everything.
And it's especially dangerous if you have someone, like a GSP who's stupidly fast and powerful when he does it, because it can put you in a really nasty position where both of your legs get trapped together underneath the other guy.
Mm-hmm.
So this happened to the Polish guy. Is he had both of his legs together pinned under the other guy. It is not a good position to be in. And he just immediately started shrimping back, and got up against the cage.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now he's in a safer position, and he just started methodically working his way out. Well, which is what you have to do.
Yeah. And there's a mindset that comes, this definitely comes with training. You have to have the training. And you have to have been in that position so many times, because you got to know, I'm going to be punched in the face a lot while I'm doing this. I'm going to be, this is a given, because I'm already in that bad position. To get out, I have to take a little bit of a beating to go through this process. And it just, that's a hard mentality to gain without having been there enough and surviving through it enough to say, oh, this was the better method. It's let's take it across bounds. It's the sacrificing going out to dinner a couple times to pay off your credit card. Those are the punches to the face. It's all these sacrifices we have to make in life to get to that end point, which is the better place. And the fact that you also have to understand that the better place is not guaranteed. That other person that took him down, I didn't get to see the fight, but that other person that took him down could have kept that position no matter what the Polish guy did, if he was good enough. Mm-hmm. So you have to take the punches without a guarantee of what's going to come out the other end. And that's something that is really well trained by fighting, wrestling, or any of these competitive sports. But it's a mentality we should have with everything. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why so many of these personalities that we follow now, we're fighters, right? I'd like to bring up one that I just listened to this weekend, and it was one of the best random clicks I ever did on an interview was Tim Kennedy. And he was a UFC fighter, but he was also a Green Beret. And the things he did in Afghanistan after the government pulled out, again, talk about appreciating life. Yeah. The thing, he and like 2 other people started a nonprofit organization where they went into Afghanistan after the pullout and pulled about 17,000 people out of there, while watching most of them get killed. Yeah, in front of them. It's an amazing story. I recommend that interview. But just to appreciate that, and so many of the people that we admire nowadays, did something like that, trained in fighting,
Yeah.
were
And
wrestlers, and
Kennedy came from a wrestling background. Um,
oh,
he was
he talks about his first wrestling match in that interview, where
really
he got pinned his first wrestling match, and he looked to the side of the ring, and his dad was there, and he just wanted to just run away. But over time
that.
you get through
That's
that
why you
feeling.
do it. And I was very
Yeah.
proud of our kids, the whole team, that we didn't have one of these, but every single youth wrestling tournament, there will be at least one, but usually closer to 5 or 6, screaming at the top of their lungs, I can't breathe.
Mhm.
All right, child. If you can screech at the top of your lungs so that you can be clearly heard outside of the gym, that you can't breathe, you can breathe, because screaming requires air.
Mhm.
Okay. You're just freaking out because you are not used to being uncomfortable.
And it is a natural reaction though, because
But
in social society,
uh-huh.
screaming gets you help as well.
Yes, it is
But
a natural reaction, but it is a natural reaction that you have to control. Fight or flight is a natural reaction
mhm.
that you need to be in control of.
Well, you need to learn the difference between real emergency and just slight discomfort for now.
Mm-hmm.
It's back to our original point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard line to draw. We're talking very sometimes we stay sober in our conversations about the government, but there are points where you have to wonder, is this the end? Is this the end point? Is this the thing that's going to break the whole system?
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of situations where it looks like that. And
Yeah, there's some, the more I learn about Uvalde, the more I think I can't believe this didn't get uglier than it already was.
mhm.
Because as ugly as it was on the inside, I'm genuinely surprised that it didn't turn even uglier on the outside. The more we learn about what the police were doing there,
Yeah.
or not doing, as the case may be.
Well, we can even go back to the Kaepernick debate. The accusations being launched at the majority of America, and yet there's a complete lack of violent response. That tells you everything you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
Because maybe the problem you think is there is not there, because
Well,
otherwise you would have had a violent response.
That is a really good point, because the first one of the few violent responses that pops into my mind is the young man in Dallas who, during one of the early BLM protests, because I think this was shortly after, or some of the Ferguson protests may have still been going on. I can't remember the exact timeline, but this was not a young black man who grew up in the neighborhoods that the people like Kaepernick are talking about. Because if their accusations were correct, then you would expect the violent response to come from these neighborhoods where where this alleged oppression is taking place. It didn't. This kid was a young man from a middle-class family, an intact family. Now, he was a child of divorce, and he, lived with his father and his stepmom, but he was radicalized when he went to college, and he started being inundated with these accusations, and he decided he had to go do something. And I can't remember, I think it was 6 police that he killed, before he was killed, when he opened fire during this protest. And you in the few times I can think of where this has happened, it has been people who were radicalized by rhetoric, not radicalized by violent oppression.
Mhm.
But to the point here, the more both of these things keep happening, the more we are headed towards an absolute disaster. We are headed towards the storming of the Bastille, and we just have to hope that there's enough, actual American ideology left that we don't end up with the terror. Yep.
That's what I thought of as soon as you were bringing that up. And not
Yeah.
only that, let's add the second debate on what people are mad about now, which is paying back that 200K. It's there's a lot of self-fulfilling prophecies in all this.
Well,
I think the theme of this episode has been around the fact that we're so detached from hardship that some of these things seem so dramatic to us. And I like where you went with the MMA, because that is a good example of learning to discern when you're dead to rights and when you can actually slow down, take a deep breath, and sorry, dogs.
Yeah, well, and in fact, the second one I was looking for, the fight went to decision, and there was a point in like the fourth round where it looked like it might be over because the Georgian guy got taken down, and the Polish guy got his back, which
maybe this is our meme.
Good old Poland.
I don't know why I saved that. I just thought it was awesome. And then you brought up the Polish fighter, and we're talking about
so the Polish fighter got his back, got his neck, and the Georgian guy had one of his legs pinned underneath him. So pulled back and pinned underneath. So that's a really bad and painful, uncomfortable situation. So not only do you have to worry about not getting choked out, but you don't have the leverage you should have because you've only got one leg on the ground until you can get that other leg free. And he kept working. You know, he didn't struggle irrationally. He kept working. He worked his techniques. He worked that leg free while he was, keeping that chin tucked and trying to work that arm out from around his neck. And he eventually managed to escape, to take the fight to the decision. And whereas most of us would look at that and go, "Oh, you're done." And he wasn't. He managed to work his way free and land enough good strikes that, it wasn't entirely clear going to the judges which way it was going to come out. But speaking of crazy people, and contrasting with
well, just to stay on subject for a second, let me bring up
no, this is on subject, because this is where my mind went when we were going to talk about the Roe v. Wade decision, was the reaction to it. And your discussion on the reaction to it was very different from what I pulled up here. Did you have something else you wanted to share first, though?
We took a quick break, but I wanted to stay on MMA for just a second, because you learn a lot about yourself when someone's punching you in the face. And it just kind of brought a little nostalgia. This is after my first Muay Thai class.
Yeah.
That was many inside leg kicks because I fought
Ouchie.
southpaw. And then, but more to what we were talking about, that's when you learn a lot. That was my first fight. And
You look tired.
I look tired, but also that's the look of defeat, because the hand on the other side is being raised. And that's when you learn a lot about yourself. So not only was I, to what we were talking about, not only was I outclassed in every way, it was his first MMA fight, but he was 56-0 in NAGA grappling competitions and undefeated amateur boxer as well. And this was my first competitive thing since high school wrestling. And so he beat the shit out of me for about 2 rounds. I'm actually proud I lasted 2 rounds. But when his arm went around my neck, I tapped like that. It felt like an eternity in there. But when I watched the video later, I was like, I didn't put up a fight. And that was a learning moment.
Because
It-
you're already so gashed, you are already in a defeated mindset.
So I made it a point to get good at not panicking in those situations, and it paid off because it was another 2 years before I lost. Unfortunately, that was my last one when I had to retire on a loss, but it was the biggest contributor was the fact that I got good at just not tapping when that initial moment of panic. And so you learn a lot about yourself, and you always learn better from your hardships if you pay attention. And so I think that was an important point with what we're doing. What we're talking about now is this the thing that's going to end the society that we live in? And then when you make that kind of connection, that no, it might be a setback from what I want, but it's not the end. I can still kind of wiggle through this. You have a different reaction, a less panicky reaction.
That is a good point, and it makes me think it's not an accident that in all of these videos I've seen of protesters that have been out since before the decision was announced, and then since, these are young people. These are like college age kids. Okay. It's not an accident that that is who is most unhinged, and is most motivated to go out and demonstrate, because these are, first of all, circling all the way back to our discussions, talking about Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams. These kids do not have the lived experience that previous generations did. First of all, secondly, every generation has been getting worse and worse and worse of the participation trophy generation. It started with us, and then it just exploded. So we often talk about, when LeBron says something stupid, this is a guy who's never been punched in the face, and it shows. There's a lot of that going around. Well, these are kids, man childs, women childs, adult babies who have never been told no. Okay. To your point, this isn't that big of a deal. We can, if you're very, very pro-life, it's a big deal. But in the end, it's probably not going to change that much, because the places where a lot of abortions are done are going to continue to do lots of abortions because it's a state issue. This isn't that big of a deal. It's probably not going to change that much, practically speaking.
Well,
and yet you have people out there.
Add a layer to the irony that those are the places burning, the places where it's going to stay legal.
And these are the places where you have these dingbat girls walking around in these Handmaid's Tale costumes. Like, okay, now that is, and some of them, that is literally about to come true. You're an idiot. No one has ever told you no, and it shows. And there are those who appreciate you for your lack of critical thinking, including this woman who is dumb as a box of rocks. And I don't think she represents you, but she's from your neck of the woods, so I'm going to blame you for her.
Oh, thank you.
I am mostly sure she's Houston proper, the Metro Houston. Maxine Waters, dumb as a box of rocks. Or wait, or am I getting her mixed up with someone else? Is Maxine Waters
I think she's California.
Texas or California?
I think she's California.
Who's the really dumb one from around Houston?
I don't know.
It doesn't really narrow it down.
Oh, hold on.
You know what I'm talking about, though, right?
Yeah, because I got a client that's moving into her jurisdiction, and she complained about it.
And she's the one that wears the funny hats all the time, right? Like the sparkly cowboy hats.
Man, now I'm gonna have to look it up while you're talking.
Okay.
Well, I can't, because when you share screen, for some reason I can't have any of my screen. So
you can go to view options, and you can get out of the full screen that it defaults you into. All right.
Well, does it change the video though?
No, it doesn't change.
Okay. Okay, so theoretically, you're not able to see what I'm doing here. If that changes, then someone say so in the comments.
We will defy them. What does that sound like?
It's Congresswoman, right?
Yeah, yeah. Gonna fight. Oh no. That sounds dangerous. Wait.
Sheila Jackson.
Sheila Jackson Lee. There you go.
Yeah. Oh, we got AOC there.
And now we have AOC.
Hey, I'm gonna go on record though that I mean, I date her. I think she's hot.
All right. So we have Representative Maxine Waters declaring that we are going to defy the Supreme Court and we are going to fight. And we are going to, and then you have AOC shouting that we're going to take it to the streets, shouting that the decision is illegitimate, not wrong,
and let me add another layer that I can't bring up because it was TikTok and hopefully it's taken down by now. I was flipping through while I was in the toilet the other day, flipping through TikTok, and I had one pop up that was all the conservative Supreme Court justices with their addresses. And I hit the report button because that's called doxing.
Well, it's worse than that. All right. This is actually my next link. All right.
What did I play into your
Oops.
hand?
I forgot to click share sound. So nobody heard any of the shouting that was going on there. Glad I turned on the closed captions. But yeah, so that was just two, Maxine Waters and elected freaking representatives. All right. Well, this stuff isn't happening in a vacuum. Here we have, God, they still have that banner up there. I forgot about that. The Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness. Speaking of darkness, yes, experts say protests at SCOTUS justices' homes appear to be illegal.
Amazing.
Really? Now, I was going to ask if you knew about this, but you listened to, what's it called? Barnes, Fry and Barnes, those guys.
Viva Barnes Law.
And that's where
I haven't listened to in a few weeks. So,
well, whichever one is the Canadian is where
Viva.
I first heard this. He mentioned this and I said, what? And yeah, he mentioned it and then he looked it up to cite it specifically. But I have it up here, but first I wanted to, because democracy dies in darkness, I wanted to point out what loads of crap Washington Post is. Senate Majority Leader Charles E. Schumer, meanwhile, cited the protests outside his own home. There's protests 3-4 times a week outside my house. The American way to peacefully protest is okay. Go to hell, you piece of human garbage. First of all, the American people, if they're peacefully protesting, you're an elected representative. They're supposed to try and influence you to represent them and their wishes. Judges aren't supposed to be subject to the whims of the people. That is why Title 18, Section 1507 of the U.S. Code exists. And it says, whoever with the intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice, or with the intent of influencing any judge, juror, witness, or court officer in the discharge of his duty, pickets or parades in or near a building housing a court of the United States, or in or near a building or residence occupied or used by such judge, juror, witness, or court officer, or with such intent uses any sound truck or similar device, i.e. bullhorn, or resorts to any other demonstration in or near any such building or residence shall be fined under this title or in prison not more than 1 year or both. How long have these protests been going on outside the judges' homes? One of these lunatics went with guns and zip ties in an admitted attempt to kidnap and kill Justice Kavanaugh. And he was close too. He got out on Kavanaugh Street. He was arrested down the block because he got out of an Uber in the middle of the night. It was like 1 a.m. Saw U.S. Marshals there and said, whoop, never mind, and started walking away. And they said, hey, what's up with this? And they sent some officers officers after him, and they stopped him down the road, but he was really freaking close. How long have these protests been going on, and they are blatantly illegal? And you have here Chuck Schumer, Senate Majority Leader. You've had Jen Psaki way back saying there's nothing wrong with this so long as it's people. No, by the letter of the law, this is illegal, and our apparatus, our judicial apparatus, isn't doing a damn thing about it. Let's compare.
And yet you still have people from a certain day in jail with no charges.
Time magazine.
How did I know you were going to pull that up?
Well, because I've been meaning to talk about this and we haven't. What happened to the January 6th insurrectionists arrested since the Capitol riot? It's in their freaking headline, and they continually use that word, yet they don't cite a single charge of insurrection or anything like it. And they try and set this up like they're going to just be by the numbers and give you the details, but they don't actually. Here in the first couple of paragraphs, they point out that 840 people have been arrested for storming the U.S. Capitol building on January 6th, with charges ranging from obstruction of an official proceeding to assault. Very, very few assault, just a handful of assault charges. But 17 months after the attempted insurrection, again, you're using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. A significant number of rioters are still awaiting sentencing. Some of them are still awaiting their first hearing. We have it. It is in the freaking Constitution that you cannot be denied habeas corpus. And yet we have had nearly 1,000 people denied due process.
Give me my screen back real quick.
For what you keep saying is an insurrection. And yet, as
here we got.
Okay.
We got follow up. Oh, no, wait, never mind. This is from 2017 during the Trump inauguration. Oopsie. Guess what? They all were let go.
Mm-hmm. So back to Time magazine, and speaking of democracy dying. So
oh, time.
So far, the median prison sentence for the January 6th rioters is 45 days. And again, in your headline and all throughout the article, you keep using the word insurrection. I'm sorry, I thought insurrections were a serious thing. And yet the median prison term is 45 days. An additional 57 rioters have been sentenced to periods of home detention, while most sentences have included fines, community service, and probation for low-level offenses like illegally parading or demonstrating in the Capitol, which is a misdemeanor. Hundreds of additional cases are expected to be adjudicated in the coming months, with a number of sentence hearings already on the calendar this fall. Here's a look at what happened to 14 of the most high-profile January 6th rioters.
Probably so Buffalo guy, Q guy.
Exactly. So you set this up, talking about the numbers and making big, scary declarations, but then all you do is you look at the 14 most high profile. Okay. Go away. More than 300. This is Axios. This is not a right-leaning site. Have pleaded guilty to January 6 charges. So they have numbers. 246 of those that have pled guilty have done so to misdemeanors, 59 have pled guilty to felonies, and 19 to charges of assaulting law enforcement officials. 6 people have been found guilty at court trials, including 5 who were found guilty by juries of felonies. 1 was found guilty of assaulting, resisting, or impeding officers using a deadly or dangerous weapon. I believe that was the guy who threw a fire extinguisher at some officers, but I could be mistaken there. Most of the charges have been misdemeanors. However, 3 members of the far right, Oath Keepers Militia, which this is June 8th, 2022. No comment about how it has been revealed under numerous occasions that a good chunk of the Oath Keepers militia are federal agents. So compare and contrast what is going on with the Roe v. Wade protesters versus what is still going. We have a freaking, I should have brought this up because I wasn't quite planning on going down this rabbit hole this far, but the AOC screeching about illegitimate. Do you know that the January 6th commission is illegitimate?
Oh yeah.
Okay. This is being reported on like this is some authoritative source. There are parliamentary procedures and they are there for a reason, so that you do not have a tyranny of the majority. In order to establish something like the January 6th commission, like they did the September 11th commission, both sides have to agree. They have to agree to set it up. And then there are rules for the structure of how that committee is going to be composed, and then what powers and authority it has.
It's almost like things would be solved by what I've talked about earlier, by having things have to be a supermajority.
Or just following the rules as they exist.
Yeah.
I believe there are 2 Republicans on this January 6th committee that volunteered for this committee because they have been making noise about this for a while, and they have been on this side for a while. The Republicans as a whole and the Republican leadership did not consent to participate in this committee because of how it was going to be structured, because it wasn't going to allow it. Basically, the Democrats said, we're going to form this committee and you're not allowed to do anything on it. So they said, okay, well, we're not joining. This committee has no official powers. It's acting as if it does. It is issuing subpoenas. It has tried to hold people in contempt of Congress when it has no powers to issue subpoenas. It has no powers. Congress can compel you to testify. If you know, if we pissed off a representative enough that they called us before Congress, they can compel you to come and testify. Now they can't compel you to actually say anything. You still have your Fifth Amendment rights,
Yeah.
But they can compel you to show up. This committee cannot. It has not been legally constituted, and nobody cares.
Well,
nobody cares that it is illegal to stand in front of a Supreme Court justice's house and protest. Nobody cares that you have a constitutional protection for habeas corpus, but if you're on the wrong side of January 6th, nobody gives a damn. We are no longer a nation of laws, because to be a nation of laws, the law has to be applied equally.
So we talk about the not panic and not pull the kill switch too early. For those that lean socially my direction, but are mad at me because of the things I'm saying about January 6th and all of these other things, possession is 9/10 of the law. And at some point, it's going to swing the other way. And do you want the other side to have this power? It feels like you're never going to lose your position, to get back on the fighting analogies. It feels like you're never going to lose your position. But what you do when you have that position can turn that tide. If you go for that submission before you're in complete control, you just put yourself in a situation where they're going to be able to fight back. And then if they get the top position, you might not be able to get out of that. And we talked about my last fight losing. I did that. I went for an armbar when I had the mount, when I should have just kept my position and imposed my will. So I went for that thing that would have been the kill shot when it wasn't a good time to do it. And anything that happens now will be used against you. And so if you lean my direction, you don't want to see that either, because we've talked about our differences socially. And so you talk about Roe v. Wade and talk about abortion and talk about Handmaid's Tale and everything. This is how you allow for that to happen, because you just created powers that didn't exist. And then when the other side takes power, they will use it against you. There is no talk about great thinkers. The more I read of somebody that people demonize on the right, the more I thought he was a genius was Saul Alinsky. He absolutely was a genius. He knew how to manipulate people better than most modern thinkers of any day and age, and that's not a good thing. But at the same time, there's respect there, and one of the concepts he talked about was being careful with the power you gain, because it will be used against you if someone else gets that power, and that's what I'm trying to prevent. I mean, albeit we're just a small voice, but I think some of the great thinkers of this day and age would agree that that's something we need to prevent.
So here's a pretty extreme analogy that I like to use when I complain about how HOAs are unconstitutional and communist. If you can compel me to join an HOA to protect your property values, how come I can't compel you to go to church?
I think I have an argument for this one. I'm just trying to think if I can articulate it.
Now,
Yeah.
hold on here. Nobody's violating your rights, because I'm not saying, what church you have to go to. You just have to pick one. See, I'm not violating your rights. You just have to pick one. How quickly do you think I could find studies to show that people who regularly attend any church are better citizens by any metric? Does that not protect your my property values? Therefore, whether or not you attend a church regularly is my business.
Okay, so let me clarify this argument. You're saying if I want to buy a house in this neighborhood, I have to pick a church in that neighborhood. Okay, so that is different. That is actually an argument I would defend, because the private owners of that property that are selling it to you are kind of the arbitrators of the HOA. So whoever owns the neighborhood. And so for ownership rights, you can discriminate who you sell your property to, and you can put parameters on that with the HOA. Now, as just a general rule, that's where I thought you were going with this, but
well,
no.
it does get more complicated, because okay, well, first of all, I would say no, because that completely abrogates the whole point of private property. Is it's now my property, so buy.
No, but I can choose not to sell it to you to begin with, and you make the HOA agreement before you buy the property, or in the buying process of the property. So you agree to the parameters. Now, when the HOA changes rules, now we're entering a different.
My point is, you cannot create a contract that violates basic human and civil rights, and an HOA does that. You cannot have a contract in the Roman style where you've brought up Spartacus. It's that first season especially is great at showing the culture and times of Rome, that if you were in debt, you would sell yourself as a slave.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be contractual for a period of time. You would be this person's slave for this period of time, and you would get this benefit at the end of it.
I would say we do that all the time.
Not to that degree. There's not that extreme of a violation of your human and civil rights.
Marriage.
Not even close.
Not even close.
Not even close.
Student loans.
That's any amount of debt is now that one's a little fuzzier, because you can't ever get out from under it, even with the bankruptcy. What actually leads into my other ranting point about HOAs, of where this becomes more complicated, because student loans are a special category established by the government. You're more free in Houston, where they don't have the same regulations, but in Frisco, you are required to join an HOA. There are that is why certain properties around here.
That's different. That's the government coming in. So if I want to move into a nice neighborhood that has an HOA, I am making a certain choice. But if everything is required to have an HOA per the government, that's a completely different argument. So if I want to have the benefits of what that HOA does for a neighborhood, I have that choice where I'm at. But if everything's required to have an HOA and they all have this cookie cutter standard of how they do things, then that becomes a different argument, because now that's government regulation over everything, over private industry. So we're talking two different things. We're talking apples and oranges. They're both fruit, but they're different.
See, I don't think we are, because where we got off on this tangent is the idea that you don't take power for yourself that you wouldn't want someone you disagree with to have.
I'm not seeing the connection. So I'm not following on this one.
Well, because you can go down any number of rabbit holes with the HOA as an example of, more and more extreme. Well, hey, your business is my business because it affects my property value. There was a case in the North Dallas area, and I can't remember exactly where. I think it may have been Irving, actually, a couple of years ago, where.
Okay, I am putting it together, by the way. And I think you kind of misunderstood something that I was saying.
Okay.
I was saying it's urgent for people on the side of the social issue you want to make sure that you're not grasping for powers that extend beyond what is reasonable. Because if you lose that position, that same power will be used against you. You set precedent. You set the precedent. And so if that does happen and you get that rebound effect and then something horrible happens, it's kind of on you as well. It was my mistake to go for that armbar. And I couldn't recover from that mistake. And I'm trying to analogize to the fact that if you are more socially liberal, you're making a mistake to support these extreme grasps for power. And so that was my point.
That made me think of the first X-Men movie, when the guy goes into the cage to fight Wolverine and the ref tells him not to hit him in the nuts. And he says, why is it against the rule? No, because it'll piss him off. So it's within the parameters of the rules, but you still don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Because then you open yourself to a nut shot.
And realistically, we have history to provide the fact that sometimes that was successful. We have Nazi Germany. We have Stalinist Soviet Union. We have Mao. We still have Maoist China, right? They made that move from a good position, but you're looking at a 50-50 country where it slightly leans one way or the other. This is not a totalitarian country. So that, in effect, prevents some very bad things, but at the same time, it creates a situation where you can create your own problems. Because if you grasp for extra power in that dynamic, it's too flimsy. You don't have the position. As Boss Rutan used to say, position before submission. You don't have the position you think you do. It's too flimsy. And if you go for it now, it can be you can be swept on your back and it can completely go against you. Not to condone totalitarian governments, but at the same time, it's a different situation. And it will be used against you.
Well, to your example, how many people who look at the history of the Soviet Union right after Lenin died, and Stalin versus Trotsky and other people, that you had a number of factions that supported Lenin because, hey, this is going to be good for me too. But then when Lenin died, and then you had that fight for supremacy that ended up with Stalin on top, and he was incredibly vindictive. He was a literal gangster, and he killed everybody who he even remotely thought opposed him or would oppose him. To your point with that extreme example of a totalitarian system, is all those people that Stalin killed came up together. They were on a level together behind Lenin, supporting Lenin and supporting the October Revolution and all that. And look where it got them.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can go to more recent history in the United States. Look at this January 6th committee. Now imagine a conservative takeover and we got McCarthyism again. Everybody's a communist that doesn't agree with me. And it's an easy switch. Same powers, different leadership, boom, flip it back the other direction.
I got to quibble with you, though, because that's a bugaboo of mine. McCarthyism isn't what people think it is.
Well, I know, yeah, it's an exaggeration, but I'm using it as a term of understanding, I should say.
But it isn't. It is related to what we're talking about here, because it's how, this one thing can then be morphed into this other thing. So what people think about when they think about McCarthyism is they think what they're actually thinking of is the House Un-American Activities Committee. House is the key word there. McCarthy was a senator. So what McCarthy started out with, there's a good book called Blacklisted by History that goes through this, that McCarthy was a bombastic showman. He was a politician. So you can definitely criticize him for that and for how he handled some of this, but he was right. His point and his concern was that the Soviet Union had infiltrated the State Department. And he was right.
He's still right to this day.
Yeah, still right to this day. And that was what he was pushing back against. That's what his committees and everything that he was doing was all about, were these literal Soviet agents, a lot of sympathizers within literal agents within the State Department.
But now take that same concept and use it against political opponents, which is what the January 6th committee is doing right now. So now you flip the script. 2022 majority takes over. Maybe 2024 you get someone from that new majority into the top position, and you have kind of a leaning in that direction in the Supreme Court. That's a recipe for everything you don't want.
And to stay on the analogy, that's kind of what HUAC was, that morphed away from what McCarthy had done and became focused more on cultural Marxism to make political points, to make political hay, rather than what McCarthy was trying to do, which was a specific threat to the government from a foreign agency.
Now, what I will say is why you don't see this from the right as much is the difference of mentality of, I want to use the word safetyism. They actually see the dangers of this a little bit more.
Well, this goes back to Haidt, and why you brought him up way back in our rambling prologue, is that to his point, there is a difference between the left and the right because they think differently. They have different priorities on these values that we share, and they have different ways of thinking and approaching these issues.
Well, and this whole conversation keeps circling back around because conservatism is about comfort to a large degree, right? You're in your comfort zone. You don't want to leave your comfort zone. You like that safety. You like that security. You like it's proven to work. So why leave, right? Whereas the other side of the aisle is progress, right? Progress leaves the comfort zone. The problem is sometimes there's good things about the comfort zone that we want to keep. And then there's the other side of it is we also need progress. And I don't know. I have a feeling that we're getting too far outside of the comfort zone. You got to test the branches before you get onto the next one on the tree. You can't just jump from branch to branch. And I'm afraid this January 6th thing is jumping to a new branch that we don't know is going to hold or not. We haven't tested our weight on it. It's too flimsy. The tree's too flimsy.
Oh yeah. And it's something's going to break. And the odds are when it does, it's not going to be something you can control. Which is, why I said earlier is that we are headed for a collision, and how it's just a question of how bad is it going to be.
Rhinoceroses have a group of rhinoceros are called a crash because they go at everything full speed and they can only see like 8 feet in front of them. So, so a group of
forgot that.
rhinoceros is called a crash. That's what it kind of feels like in certain situations right now. That doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It just means we kind of have that feeling at the moment.
We're
And
yeah, we're big 1 ton animals pounding the pavement, even though we can't see what's right in front of us.
yeah, and nobody even knows. Sophie, nobody. I hate to use absolutes. Very few people even know what they're fighting for in a lot of situations.
Yeah.
And that's another sad thing. It's Roe v. Wade, or if it was January 6th, to look at the other side. So many people were out there for reasons they can't even coherently describe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another part of the worry. That's why the book up here from one of the great thinkers I thought about, Madness of Crowds, that goes all directions. That's every end of the world situation that people get out and do
I
all
don't.
these.
Shortly after January 6th, I was listening to somebody, and I can't remember who it was. Um, he was a representative, and he was at the Capitol while it was happening. He was near one of the entrances and above, so he could see what was going on. And he described a scene that I thought perfectly encapsulated the whole day, which is these, as he described them, these two or three middle-aged white men, um, who looked like they should they should be at a sports bar somewhere getting ready for whatever bowl game was on that day,
Or competing in
and
the Olympics in curling or
or
something.
competing in the Olympics in curling. Yeah.
Looks like a bunch
And
of dads that wandered away from the barbecue. You know?
they were milling about. They kind of got swept up in the crowd as it moved forward, and they kind of at one point looked at each other, grabbed hold of this barrier, and were using it to try and break through a door or a window or something. And they gave it a couple of bashes, and then they set it down. They dropped it, and they looked at each other in confusion. I will never forget that. They looked at each other in confusion and then walked away. And that was so striking of what had happened that day, and then any mob movements.
The hive mind, man.
Yeah, the hive mind of what happens, and why there's a difference between taking to the streets and an actual demonstration, a
Why do we go?
planned protest.
Why do we go to a football game instead of watching it on TV? I can see it in HD, 1080p, with replay
Uh-huh.
and analysis on my TV, but I'm at the game and that feels freaking good.
Yeah, there's also, another great example of the psychological difference there is every time I've been to an NFL game, it feels like it's only an hour and a half. It feels like it's as long as the actual action is. Now, this is a televised game. There are as many breaks there as if I'm sitting at home watching it. It's the same game, but it feels so much faster.
The best sporting event I've ever attended was the old Gallagher Iba Arena, OU versus OSU wrestling duel. Came down to the last wrestler, who's quite famous nowadays, and he was an alternate versus the number 2 in the country, OU wrestler. Huh?
Was it Munoz?
No. Think UFC.
Yeah, Munoz. That's what it's.
Daniel Cormier.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It was his freshman year. It was our freshman year. So we're all the
I
same
remember
age.
that.
Yeah. And he was the alternate, and he won that match 2-1. And the whole place, that whole building felt like it was just going to collapse in on itself, with everybody just banging and, screaming and everything. And that was something I'm never going to forget. And it was that exact feeling. I could have watched that on TV and got a better view, but I never would have gotten that experience. And so now take that to something you believe in. Say you believe it's an existential threat to your life, which is sometimes who is in power, right? Depending on what your beliefs are. And then you get in that arena where everybody feels that way too. You're going to do things that you can't even, you will look back at later and be like, why the did I even go?
We talked about the Rittenhouse trial quite a bit when that was happening, and watch that video and just scratch your head and go, how many people charged this kid who's got a long arm? He's got
Mhm.
a rifle, and he keeps getting charged even after he discharges it. There are still unarmed. I mean, the one idiot with who did have a gun and then got his bicep vaporized, and I laughed about it. But then how many others were either not armed or were armed with some kind of improvised weapon, and you are repeatedly charging this individual with a gun? What level of unhinged crazy are you?
This is something that is slightly adaptive though in a socialized area, because look at like to kind of put a scene in people's mind, look at the scene in Braveheart when he gives his little speech and everybody is going, and then they go into a meat grinder.
Mm.
You kind of need that to survive to some degree when you have tribal situations, because again, like I talked about with the sexuality making your mind go blank so you can fight the alpha male. This is like the societal version of that. Again, we're a collection of the psychologies. So
That's a good point to bring it back around to an infuriating and depressing example. In the hour and a half that those freaking cops were just standing around, how many unarmed parents would have gladly charged into that classroom in Uvalde? Half dozen of them would have been shot just in rushing this guy, and considered it a fair trade.
more information came out on that too, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
They had a lot of equipment that would have allowed them to do the job
That they
properly.
said they didn't have. The door not only
Yeah.
wasn't locked, it couldn't be locked. The one that made me so mad is I'm not sure what, I believe he was an off-duty border patrol agent. I'm not sure exactly what branch of law enforcement he was with, but his wife was shot and bleeding out. Called him. He went to the school. The officers on the scene detained and disarmed him because he was going to go into that classroom. Those should be criminal charges. You're no longer just standing around like a despicable wuss doing nothing. You have crossed over from inaction to actively aiding this murderer. Those officers should be charged criminally.
Yeah, aiding and abetting. I actually see no problem with that, and let it set a precedent.
Absolutely.
Because I mean, everybody was like, "Oh, well, the kids are in danger. The kids are in danger," to enact all these other ridiculous things. Let these people take the fall because they made a decision. They made an adult decision at the time to protect their own life instead of the children. I'll get back to the Tim Kennedy interview. I'm so glad I clicked on this because it was great discussion for 2 hours. But he runs a program that teaches people to protect themselves. Basically, it's full on. It's arms. It's combat, hand-to-hand combat. It's situational awareness. It's everything that basically he's trying to give the normal person his Green Beret experience. And teachers are going in droves to these classes. And he's like, we can't even, we don't have openings because we can't sacrifice the product to just make more openings. And a lot of law enforcement, but he said the influx of teachers is heartening, because they're taking it upon themselves to protect their children, and their children being the extension of their family,
Mhm.
which is their students. And that's actually really cool, because he's doing it as a two-part product. He's doing it as a situational thing, which is what I just talked about. And then he's also backing a bunch of incentives to look at the mental health of these children and stuff. So he's taking it from both sides. But that's actually really kind of it gives me hope, because the people you talked about outside of that building, well, these people were inside the building, and they want to get better at making sure that this doesn't happen to their kids.
Mhm.
And that's kind of cool, because you kind of want to put your head in the space of, if I was a teacher in that situation, what would I do? Would I be that football player that tried to take down the gunman in Florida, or
Yeah.
would I be the one that hid under my desk? Did I spark some source?
Um, Larry Nasser.
Larry Nasser?
Hmm.
Who's that?
Isn't that the guy's name? Yeah. The doctor who molested all the US gymnasts.
Oh, yeah, that's where okay. That's where the name rings a bell.
Yeah, I was trying to remember his name so I could find this. So while we're getting mad, because this is part and parcel to all this, is we are not a nation of laws. And this is a prime example of it, of you have grotesque abrogations of their duty that had huge repercussions to defenseless victims and young girls. And there should be, at a minimum, severe disciplinary civil action against all those officers in Uvalde who were just standing around. And the ones who actively prevented anyone else from doing anything should face criminal charges. And the same damn thing should have happened here. But the FBI looked into itself for itself and said, well, we made a few boo-boos, but nobody's going to be charged.
Well,
Nothing's going to happen here.
this is a testament to a bigger issue. So we don't want too much governmental involvement in a lot of things, right?
Mhm.
But also, self-policing doesn't work either. And I'll bring up another example, and that is Derek Chauvin. That guy was before the police union so many times for disciplinary action, but they're made up of their own people. And because he was allowed to stay on the force for so long, he killed a man. Killed a man that ended up burning a nation.
Mhm.
Because they policed themselves. And this is whether it's governmental or it's from the civil, like a trial by jury, of random jury every time some of these governmental entities end up in a sticky spot. That's got to be the direction we go, because it can't be policing yourself.
No, it can't. And I brought this up last time, and I want to see more sheriffs getting involved here, because they are an elected kind of parallel law enforcement division.
Yeah,
And
that is something we talked about last time, and I added that in these high profile ones, the DAs should.
now it may be that, to your point, the DA is just going to decline to prosecute and isn't going to do anything about it. Or it may be that the DA does, and then later on the court strikes it down and says you don't have any authority here. But by golly, you should try. That I would love to see a sheriff in Michigan arrest the FBI agents who were involved here.
Mhm.
Rather than as the
It's funny how the Michigan FBI seem to be doing
yeah.
so much.
Yeah. So where was that in this article? That the Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco told Congress that she had asked the newly confirmed head of the department's criminal division to review the case. Oh, well, I'm sure that's going to go somewhere. No, rather than having to ask the FBI to review its own self, I want to see a sheriff in the areas where this kind of federal malfeasance takes place. Go arrest these assholes at a bare minimum. Do your job to protect your citizens and put the onus on the district attorney, who then needs to put the onus on the court system and say, somebody has to hold these people accountable. And we have
Well,
law
not
enforcement
only
authority.
that, add to that a citizen jury.
Yeah.
Because we're the ones that need the protection. We should be the ones making the decision.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, where is the jury of the jury of your peers is not just for you, the accused, but it is also for you, the victim.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to balance both. It's supposed to be, fellow citizens to both, to balance that, to see that justice is done.
Well, and it also randomizes the situation where you don't have a certain mindset. If you have cops, the jury over cops, they all have a cop mentality. Mm-hmm. Versus I am somebody who is frequently pulled over by the cops. I have a different mindset. Or I am somebody who feels protected by the cops. That is also on there. It randomizes the situation. So that way the truth is more likely to come out. The more random, that's why we randomize trials. The more unknowns there are and the bigger the number, the greater result you have towards the truth. Because we go back to the beginning of this conversation. John Stuart Mill. The only way to overcome your bias is to talk with other bias. And so if you randomize the bias, the more the truth has to prevail for it to be the right decision.
This fits right into what another thing we were talking about earlier of the federal government not doing its frickin' job, our elected representatives not doing their frickin' job and following the established both laws and parliamentary bureaucracy, which is there for a reason, which is there so that there is a back and forth so that you eventually come to a point that is the most agreeable for the most people. We're not following the proper procedures here. We're not following the established procedures of justice and the judicial system here. The bureaucracy is its own justice system, and it's looking at its own self and saying, nah, nothing to see here. It's fine.
Which is where populism has its place right now. It has its dangers, but it has its place right now because from the top down, there's no incentive to change that system because you always know you're going to get your turn. Mm-hmm. And if you get your turn, you'll be able to do the things you want. Whereas from the bottom up, we're the people that suffer from it. And that's why somebody like DJT can get his power because he appealed to that. Now, what we need is someone that appeals to that without their own narcissistic motives, which is probably something we'll never find. But at the same time, from the bottom up, you need a bottom up movement, which unfortunately, I would love to see something like that happens without a bottom up violent movement. And that's where the catch-22 comes in because the top is going to fight the bottom. And they have the power right now. So to take the power, it's I don't know, man. I guess that's my doom and gloom because we need a bottom up movement, but in order to do that peacefully, we need the right leader to come along, someone like a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King or someone who can handle that. And we celebrate it because it's very rare in history. It's not the norm.
Well, I think DeSantis could be that guy, but he shouldn't have to be because to your point, I don't think we need the right leader. I think we need the right leaders.
Well, this is
That
true,
because
which is why the situational change is to me is the solution, because
it,
you create an environment, again, gameable
yes,
systems. You create an environment where you can't just hope for the next time you have the power.
get to know your local sheriff and your local representatives. Who are these people? What, what do they think? How do they think? And then engage them on these issues of, hey, if something like this happens here, what are you going to do about it? What you have a number of oversight, legislative, judicial, law enforcement, whatever powers, elected representative or bureaucrat or law enforcement officer. So if something like this happens here where I live, what are you going to do about it? Get to know them, who they are, and ask them those questions ahead of time.
Yeah, especially if you're in kind of a swing district. Like it's really disheartening sometimes, like living where I live, because it's going to be kind of ultra conservative no matter what I do. But some of those places that are 50-50, where somebody does have to provide answers to keep their job, that's where we're going to make the biggest impact. Like in my area, the incumbent will very actually rarely debate the new person coming in, because they know the best strategy is to just not say anything, because
just let name ID and
Mhm. And
habitual voting patterns
people
do their
wanting,
thing.
it is a nice place to live, so people just saying, you know what, nothing's wrong so far, so let's just keep doing what we're doing.
Mhm.
uh so it is a little disheartening politically around here, because there is very little debate. But there are places, we see it in the presidential elections with swing states. There are swing districts, and if you're in a swing district, man, sky's the limit. You could change everything for all of us, for good or bad. So anything else we've gone on for like 2 hours, I think.
Yeah, we've
Two and a
ranted
half hours.
ranted and rambled. um
Do you
you
want to do
know
some wheel of time for our weekly listeners?
no, let's do that next time.
Okay,
We
if
should
we
be able to
do
do
it
some.
next time, we got to do it relatively soon, just because they do kind
Yep,
of depend on it. Those are the only people that really depend on us. So
yep, yeah, we'll do another recording next time, uh to dig where we're not grumpy and depressed and fatalistic.
well, I really wasn't. It's just again, I want to put that first thing we talked about as like the major theme. If you really take a step back and look at the fact that we can fight about these things, means we have it good.
Mm.
And so that's the lack of fatalistic part of it. Now, we did go down the other direction, whereas when do we tap, or when do we panic, or when do we do this? I think if we start with the original thought, you can last a lot longer.
Yeah,
Where like you said earlier, if you're screaming, you're breathing,
yeah,
right? So we're still talking and we're not dead. The cops aren't at my door. So it's there's a chance, and I think it's a pretty decent chance. It's just going to take time. Maybe not in our lifetime, but at least it could get a little better. So,
all right, well, it's not going to get any better if nobody does anything. So
all right. Well, let me give you a little bit of silver lining. Our last talk that we thought was going to be nuked by YouTube is still up.
yeah, that's true.
So there's at least that our voice can be still heard. And
So go out and make yourself healthier mentally, emotionally, intellectually, and see what you can do on a small scale, on as small a
yeah,
scale as you can manage.
we talked about a lot of people at the beginning of this. Grab one of their books and give it a read, or listen to them talk about it. Even some of them give an hour lecture on a 500-page book that you can at least get an idea of it. And if nothing else, you just made yourself a little bit more well-rounded.
Yeah.
And that's an improvement for everybody. What is it? Nassim Taleb that says to be virtuous and interesting takes hard work. And so if you want to be an interesting person and still be pretty good inside, do a little work and read some books, fiction and nonfiction, as we talked about. So,
and we'll work on the fiction next time. So
yeah,
we'll see y'all then.
Yeah. Sorry, wheel time people. We've only got so much time in the day. All right. Later.